Well, good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm here with IAVA CEO, Jeremy Butler, to talk about VA's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and how we can better serve our veterans throughout this crisis. I want to give you all a big shout out and thank IAVA and all of your members. We're grateful to have you here with us, even if it's just virtually. We can't be here in person. But first of all, I want to give you a brief update. The committee is still getting daily slide decks from VA with facility level data on the number of veterans and employees that have been tested, how many are positive. We're getting information about PPE levels. Last week, I asked VA for data on minority veterans who tested positive for COVID-19, specifically, since we know that they have been disproportionately impacted by this crisis. We've also had weekly calls with both the Secretary and Dr. Stone related to the department's response to COVID-19. In fact, just a couple hours ago, I was on a call with the Secretary and Dr. Stone. But I'm sure, as you're aware, my team, I and my staff, we've been pressing for more transparency throughout this crisis. What's important right now is that we know what VA needs in order to keep their staff and veteran patients safe. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today, Jeremy, to see how it is we can help. So what are you hearing from your membership? What seems to be their top concerns?
Thank you, Chairman Takano. I appreciate you inviting us here. And before I get into that, I do want to say thank you. You've been a great ally of all veterans and certainly of IAVA every time we all come to Washington, D.C. It's great to get a chance to meet with you and your staff to talk about things like this. We were just there in March for our Storm the Hill. Luckily, we got that in right before everything kind of started to shut down for this pandemic. So it's good to now get a chance to connect with you virtually to continue the conversation that we sort of started then and have been pushing forward with, because you're absolutely right. So we, like you, have been pushing the VA for more transparency, more communication, more answers about what's going on ever since the beginning of this pandemic. We knew that the government, writ large, really wasn't prepared for what we were about to face. And so it wasn't about placing blame. It was about making sure that our veterans knew what was going on, understood what kind of issues they might be facing in terms of the VA not fully being prepared and the government not being prepared, and then to basically help the VA to communicate with the veteran community to make sure that they were getting the care, the best care that basically we could provide during this time. So sort of as you mentioned, we've been on weekly calls with the VA, which were something that we called for from the beginning. They've been useful, but they've also been a little frustrating. I think that one of the things we found is that we're kind of talked to more than we're talked with by the VA officials. So we'll get updates, but we won't always get answers to our questions. A lot of them have been around the things you touched on: PPE, hydroxychloroquine, other so-called treatments for the pandemic, for the coronavirus, that we wanted to know more from them about how they were using them, how the veterans were responding to the treatments. And unfortunately, we seem to get more pushback than we really did answers. And what we're really just looking for is a better understanding from them. So what our members are telling us is that these are difficult times. We're certainly dealing with the understandable closing of many facilities, especially community care facilities. And so our veterans haven't been able to get to appointments. They haven't been able to get to compensation and pension review boards, things like that. We understand that that's going to happen during these times, but what we need is better understanding of how they can connect and what's going to happen. One of the positives I think that we've seen is that there's been a lot of increase in telehealth work by the VA. They've done a very good job of expanding their telehealth capabilities. They've been sending out physical tablets and other computer equipment so that veterans that maybe don't already have tablets and other IT equipment have been able to reach out and connect. So that's been very helpful. We've seen that as a very good thing. But we do see an increase in unmet mental health needs from the veteran community, frankly, right now. And I think that's only going to get worse as we continue to fight the pandemic and as we frankly now deal with some of the effects of it, such as increased economic distress, more homelessness, more job loss, frankly, and now the national civil unrest that's going on. I think all this is only going to exacerbate the really negative trends that we've been seeing. And so there's a lot of work that the VA needs to do, and we're here as an ally, frankly. I always try to emphasize that we want to make sure that the VA is providing the best care possible to the veterans. So sometimes, that means us pushing back on the VA for things that they're doing, but certainly other times it's calling them out for good things too, because we want to be seen as an ally, just as I know you do. And so it's appreciative that we have these opportunities to talk to you, talk about legislation that we both want to get done and get pushed through.
Yeah, I think we both share the desire to have the VA be the best it can be. We're not interested in destroying the VA, in maligning it, in replacing it, in privatizing it. We want to see the VA succeed, but that doesn't mean we have to be to overlook where it falls short and how it needs to improve. Tell me more about what kind of updates you're getting from the VA. You touched upon the same things I touched upon. What's making it feel like you're not getting all the information that you need? What's frustrating about what in particular can you cite as examples?
No, it's a great question. So I think the biggest thing was around the hydroxychloroquine. That kind of really symbolized some of the frustration that we had. Let me start from the beginning though. When it first came out, as you know, there was a study or a report. There's some back and forth as to what the proper term for it was. But at the end of the day, a group took the results that the VA provided of how many veteran patients at VA facilities were treated with hydroxychloroquine, also treated with hydroxychloroquine and another drug, and then also that were treated with neither of those. And what the report found is that when they looked at the results of those veterans, those that were treated with hydroxychloroquine and or with the additional drug were found to either be placed on ventilators at a higher rate or to die at a higher rate than those that weren't. That was alarming. We pushed back and said, hey, we just want to know more from the VA as to how they're using it, why they're using it, what the policies and procedures are. We never really got clear answers to those questions. What we really just got was angry responses that the test or that the report, that the study was flawed and that they were always just operating in the best manner for the patients. That's been really their answer to this day, even as more information has come out about the potential negative uses of hydroxychloroquine. So that really set things kind of off in a bad tone. At the same time, we're dealing with, as we were discussing, an increase in mental health needs among the veteran community. It's been almost now 15 months since the VA, in conjunction with the administration, launched their Prevent Task Force focused on combating veteran suicide, frankly, veteran, military, and civilian suicide. So 15 months ago, almost to the day, that task force kicked off with a goal of providing a roadmap in 12 months. We're 3 months beyond that point. The secretary last week in testimony said that we'd be seeing the results of that roadmap on June 14th. But when we're reaching out to the White House, they're not committing to that date. So a little bit of confusion there as to whether or not we're going to see that roadmap there for both of us, for both certainly your office and IAVA. Combating this scourge of veteran and military suicide has been a problem for years. And so we were excited to see the administration launch this task force 15 months ago. But frankly, it's taken way too long for them to roll out any actions. We've been fighting for this. We've got legislation on the Senate side that we're very anxious to get moved. And so we'd like to see the VA and the administration provide us more information, not only on when we're going to see this roadmap, but what's going to be involved in it. Because we, again, here as VSOs, not just IAVA, but all of us, we want to make sure that whatever the administration is going to do to combat this, we can reinforce them and help them to get that message out to the veteran community. But we just haven't really been given any information on it.
Yeah, regarding the hydroxychloroquine, it seems to me, I mean, it seems like Secretary Wilkie has been publicly promoting it, and it's a conflict in my mind, because there's been, beyond the study you're referring to, and I realized the study was not, it was really kind of a review.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a double-blind study. I mean, that's the point they're making. But there's been some other scientific sort of feedback out there which throws doubt onto whether or not hydrochloroquine should be used. Have you seen that one graphic of the timeline of hydroxychloroquine at the VA, and its use increased as there was the emergency authorization for it, but it seems that it's declined, and even as the secretary is speaking robustly about defending its use, it seems like the actual use within the VA itself by doctors who are prescribing it, they're actually not prescribing it very much. It seems like it's down to a very negligible number. So despite what the secretary says in public, it seems like the doctors seem to be following a lot of the health recommendations out there. So anyway.
Exactly.
And I'll tell you, Dr. Van Dalen, I did have a conversation with her. She leads the Prevents Task Force. I was a little distressed with her that we had a meeting before the pandemic, like you and I had a meeting before the pandemic set in Washington, before we closed down in-person meetings. And Dr. Van Dalen hasn't really been in touch. She assured me that she would be in more regular communication. As you know, my staff is putting together, a comprehensive suicide prevention bill. And I told her that we hope that the White House and her task force would be in touch with us. I mean, I think on a bipartisan basis, and it's not the norm that we have a Republican-controlled Senate, a Democratic-controlled House, and a White House, with President Trump, all saying that that suicide prevention is a top agenda item in terms of how we want to help veterans. And so I'm hopeful that we can keep this topic a characteristically veteran topic, meaning that it's above partisanship and it's above that this is a need that we need to address in the typical sort of nonpartisan way we do things in the veteran space. So anyway, I hear you about, I mean, she was being very, tight-lipped about what she could tell us. I said, well, even on an informal basis, my staff kind of needs to know stuff. It takes time to put things into legislative language, so anyway, well, thank you for letting us know the frustrations you're experiencing. And again, this isn't a VA that I have to say seems to have done a relatively good job with its community living centers and its own nursing homes, and its paralyzed veterans. I mean, they really took extra measures to protect these veterans, and we've had very minimal fatalities in these facilities. And I think the VA has something to teach the nation as a whole about infection control and about the expertise that you need. And so I'm hopeful that we move into that kind of conversation. But let's turn to the topic of mental health. It's sort of related to suicide prevention, or it is related. I know physical distancing can lead to feelings of stress and isolation, and especially now we've got layered on top of this the civil unrest that creating all other sets of anxieties. I know I feel it. And I think especially for veterans who may already be experiencing PTSD, any number of things we can clearly understand why a veteran would be triggered or set off by what's happening right now. They may have other mental health concerns. What seems to be the most pressing mental health needs for your members right now?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because you're absolutely right. It was an issue that was important to us. Certainly before the pandemic, it got worse with the pandemic, and I think it's even worse now that we've got this national unrest. We IAVA, happenstance, a good timing. We launched an expanded program that we call our Quick Reaction Force, which is a now 24/7 free resource for any veteran and his or her family. They can reach out to us at 1-855-91-RAPID. They can go online at iava.org and connect to the Quick Reaction Force. And they'll be put in touch with a veteran peer-to-peer counselor that they can talk to about anything that they're trying to deal with. So that can be anything from simply trying to access the GI Bill to it could be, I'm struggling with a mental health issue that I want to talk about. And our counselors are there to connect them to resources, to stay with them for the long haul, to make sure that they get the help they need. Because frankly, we saw this starting to increase in the beginning of the pandemic, and it's certainly only getting worse now. And it's veterans reaching out for help with job loss, with homelessness, as we've been discussing, with increased mental health needs. And I think a lot of that is because, one, all of these facilities are closing down. So if you had places where you were going to talk to your fellow veterans, where you're going to talk to a counselor, talking to someone that understood what you were going through, now you can't do that. Now we've got physical distancing going on, which is appropriate, but it can be hard to then make that adjustment to figure out where you turn to. So that's one of the good things, is that we do have an ability, not only through IAVA's Quick Reaction Force, but through increased telehealth. As we mentioned, we have ways that veterans and their families can connect to resources. But that's not going to be enough. That's not going to be the end of the solution. It's not enough for those veterans that maybe don't have broadband internet that they can easily connect that way, that maybe don't have the physical IT infrastructure to allow them to connect. They don't have an iPad, they don't have a smartphone, and they're not necessarily up on that technology. So more needs to be done. You mentioned some of the legislation that's being worked on. I think that's really important because it's not just going to be a VA fix to this problem. It's not just going to be a VSO, MSO fix to the problem. It's going to be all of us working together to not only increase VA capabilities, but also working with those nonprofits, those foundations, those organizations out in the community that can connect to veterans who are disconnected from the VA. Not every veteran is eligible for VA services, as we know. Not every veteran that is eligible necessarily wants to use the VA. They may have had a bad experience, or they may just not feel that it's for her. So to give veterans an opportunity to connect with support and help in whatever means is fitting for him or her is the right idea. And part of that means expanding VA's capabilities, but also means expanding the capabilities of those non-governmental organizations that are serving veterans in all corners of the country.
Well, thank you for that, Jeremy. If I know you have your own 24-hour hotline. Do you mind if I share the VA's hotline?
Please do, absolutely.
I don't want to, but I know we work in tandem, and it's awesome that IAVA has its own crisis line, or just even just a helpline. You have to be in crisis. Call.
Exactly.
Veterans with any kind of need can call your crisis, your number, your 24-hour number. But I want to give out the Veterans Crisis Line, which is also staffed 24/7. It's 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. And select option 1, or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. You can text that number. And the Veterans Crisis Line is there for veterans who may be experiencing an emotional crisis, a crisis that is possibly suicidal. And we want I want you to know that this service is available 24/7. I want to move on to a few other topics. We have about 8 minutes left, so let's. One of these topics is likely to get a strong reaction from you. Um, uh, the IAVA has advocated for some time about updating the VA motto to make it more inclusive. And recently, Secretary Wilkie announced that the motto would be erected in bronze at all VA cemeteries. What is IAVA's stance on this move?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We have been advocating for years now, not only that more needs to be done at the VA to recognize and support our women veterans. There's a lot of women veterans that aren't comfortable going into a VA. There's a lot of women veterans that can't get the treatment that they need from the VA. And part of that begins with the motto. This isn't just a symbolic change that we're pushing for, but literally, I think when you talk to a lot of women veterans, especially those who maybe were dealing with military sexual assault, military sexual trauma, coming off of active duty, or maybe they've dealt with it as a veteran, when they walk in to a VA facility and they see that motto that says, "For he who is born to battle," that can be off-putting. That can be a reminder that this is a government agency that was not designed for her. It was designed to take care of male veterans. So we've been pushing for a change to the motto. This has nothing to do with not honoring Abraham Lincoln. This has nothing to do with history. This has everything to do with the fact that we need, from the top down at the VA, to be showing that it's a new VA that is there for all veterans. It's there for men veterans, it's there for women veterans, it's there for any veteran who served and that now needs the government support. That begins, frankly, I think, by changing the motto. This is something that the secretary can do himself. It doesn't take legislation. It doesn't take presidential approval. The secretary would send a powerful message, I think, to all veterans that, one, we need to change the culture of the VA, which too often looks at women as not veterans, look at them as maybe being a spouse of a veteran or the girlfriend of a veteran, and that's wrong. If we change the motto to something that's inclusive of all veterans, that sends a strong signal. So frankly, it's very discouraging to hear the secretary say that he wants to not only keep the motto, but now spend the time and the effort to put it in every cemetery. To me, that's a slap in the face to the entire post 9/11 generation of veterans. We're certainly not the only generation that have served with women. Women have been fighting in our military since before we were a country. They continue to do so today, and we need to make sure that at every step of the way, we're showing that we're a government, that we're a VA, that we're a military that honors and respects their service, and they can start that by changing the VA motto.
Well, thank you for that perspective, and certainly I would hope that while we're hashing this out, that there wouldn't be a rush to expend new money.
Right.
Right. So, on another topic, what do you understand about the relationship between COVID-19 and veterans exposed to burn pits in service, and how can we identify and prioritize care and services for these veterans?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's been another area, and I failed to mention earlier when you asked about where we're not hearing enough from the VA. This is something that IAVA has been pushing for, along with many other veteran service organizations, and that's for more to be done to support those veterans who've been exposed to burn pits, and frankly, that have been exposed to other toxic exposures. This is a massive problem. It's not a new problem. The most famous example of it is the Agent Orange exposure that our Vietnam veterans had and continue to have to fight for care today. For the post 9/11 generation, the biggest example seems to be the burn pits that so many have dealt with and have gotten sick from. And what we know about COVID-19 is that it doubly impacts those that have underlying conditions, especially underlying conditions that are respiratory or cardiac related. And that fits to a T what burn pit exposure does to a veteran. It makes it harder to breathe. It affects your heart. And so what we wanted to see from the get-go is for the VA to reach out to those, not just that were on the burn pit registry, because it's only a small fraction of those exposed that are actually on the burn pit registry. It only has about 200,000 names on it, but so many more of us were exposed to burn pits. So we would have liked to see early and frequent outreach to those on the burn pit registry, but frankly to all veterans to everyone that's connected to the VA and outside of the VA that if you are exposed to burn pits, you are possibly at a greater risk of suffering from increased results if you come down with COVID-19. It's not just burn pits, really, it's all the underlying conditions that so many of our veteran community have. And so I think it's important that they make it very clear to all the veterans that they are potentially at greater risk for further damage from this pandemic.
Well, great. We just have a few moments left. I appreciate your work and dedication on the burn pit issue and toxic exposures. I know that there's an effort across VSOs to come up with some master plan to deal with toxic exposure, and that would be very helpful to me as chairman, because we have, beyond burn pits, as you said, an array of exposures to toxic substances that I believe are legitimate, in their have legitimacy, and we need to make sure we don't leave out other groups of veterans. And there were some significant passed the House, including provisions that dealt with veterans education. The top priority was around veterans homelessness.
Yep.
What legislative fixes are you watching and are priorities for you and your organization?
No, that's great. Well, you just touched on a couple of them. Really, the legislation that IAVA is working on with a larger coalition of veteran organizations, the Toxic Exposure in the American Military Coalition. We are all working together, frankly, to bring to Congress one large piece of legislation, bipartisan, that we collectively feel is the best way to help those veterans that were not only exposed to burn pits, but any veterans that have been exposed to toxic exposure during their time in service. So we hope to be able to really bring to Congress, to the House and the Senate, really a solid bipartisan bill that we all agree is the best fix so that we can move quickly on that. That's one of the biggest things. The other is certainly the Deborah Sampson Act that's going to continue to do more for women veterans. We appreciate your leadership and support on that. We need to get the Senate to act on that. And then you've also supported us on the fight to get the VA to do research and really look at the potential use of cannabis as a treatment option. The VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act is something that we feel, again, is a bipartisan opportunity for the VA to take a leadership opportunity here, do the research, come back with how and if cannabis can be useful in treating so many things from PTSD to pain management, chronic pain management, things like that. And let's find out what the science is around that. So all of these are key pieces of legislation, along with the Commander John Scott Hannon Act that's over in the Senate that's going to do more for the military and veteran suicide issue that we talked upon. All of these are really the key things that we continue to be focused on.
Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to that toxic exposure bill. And if you can if you can design it in such a way, bring together members on both sides of the aisle. I don't know if your timing is going to be such that you can unveil it to the presidential candidates. And
there you go.
I'd love to see both both the president and Vice President Biden say, "Oh yes, they're both going to do it." And
right.
we need that. We need that momentum because it's frankly going to cost us some money. But in my opinion, it's money that needs to be spent. It's what we owe. We owe veterans who were exposed to any number of toxic environments, toxic substances, who ordinarily would not have been exposed to those things because they were wearing the cloth of the United States of America. And
exactly.
You stand up 100,000 person communities. That's several small towns.
Right.
You gotta set up a sewage system and a garbage disposal system, and in the haste, things happen, and those things shouldn't happen. They need to have reforms on how these things happen. There are some things that maybe were not preventable. I mean, to be deployed simply in Kabul and to be there 6 months out of the year, or the 3 or 4 months during the winter where everybody is in Kabul is burning, any number of things. This is not a burn pit issue. This is just like you're in Kabul and that's where you're stationed. Right. Around nightfall, and it's cold, and you get further into the night, the air gets more and more toxic, and that happens on a sustained basis for several months that you're deployed. There's going to be a health consequence to that, potentially a lifelong health consequence. Mm-hmm. So we need to study these things in a systematic way. We need to make sure that there's not a need to go to a health registry, that you may or may not know about it. I know you're all working on this.
Absolutely.
So I eagerly await what you're all doing. So with that, if there's nothing else, we've got to call it a session for now.
Absolutely.
And the speaker just told me the last meeting, the last time I saw her, actually I saw her in person. We were in a big room because we were spaced around the table. Yeah. She said, I want you to get one of these roundtables happening again. So I think whether it's virtually, I think it's probably virtual. I think the speaker wants to gather us all together again too. So
great.
But always a pleasure. And thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your effort and all your staff's effort to make sure that we're taking care of our veterans. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you. Stay healthy, safe.